Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is the show where we promise you a genuine intellectual shortcut to being, well, thoroughly and surprisingly well-informed.
And today we have a stack of sources that are just truly ancient, profound, and often pretty shocking.
We are going deep. We're immersing ourselves in the spiritual literature of early Buddhism. The Therigatha, that's the verses of the senior monks, and its parallel collection, the Therigatha, the verses of the senior nuns.
These texts are just exceptional. They're not, dry historical records or purely philosophical treatises.
Oh, not at all.
They're collections of raw, deeply personal spiritual poetry. What we have here, collected some 2,500 years ago, are the struggles, the epiphanies, the defeats, and, the ultimate triumphs of the very first Buddhist contemplatives.
It's like reading the private journals of people having these world-changing spiritual breakthroughs.
Exactly.
So our mission today is pretty clear. We need to unpack these voices, giving equal time and weight to the experiences of both the men and the women who are pursuing liberation or nibbana during the time of the Buddha.
And right after him, we're looking beyond the big philosophical frameworks and diving straight into the messy, urgent, and exhilarating human heart under immense spiritual pressure.
Right. And to ground ourselves, we have to remember the setting.
Yeah, this is key. We're in Jambudvipa, which is the ancient name for the Indian subcontinent, around 500 BCE.
So the verses, they often mention these great regional powers like Magadha and Kosala.
The big competing kingdoms where the Buddha spent most of his life teaching. It was a world dominated by nature, by wandering ascetics, and just intense intellectual and religious debate everywhere.
And before we jump into the texts themselves, I want to use the words of one of these monks, Kakavata, which I think just beautifully sets the stage for what we're hoping to find today. He says, see this wisdom of the realized ones? Like a fire blazing in the night, giving light, giving vision. They dispel the doubt of those who've come.
Like a fire blazing in the night. That's powerful.
It is. That fire, that moment of dispelling doubt, that's exactly the experience captured in these poems.
So let's start by establishing what we're actually reading. The Therigatha is the collection for the senior monks, the Theras. It's a vast collection, 1,289 verses that are traditionally associated with 264 monks.
And the Therigatha is its parallel, a little smaller, for the senior nuns, the Theras.
Right.
These are seminal spiritual classics, absolutely foundational. But, and this is important for you to keep in mind, we have to talk about authorship. We can't just assume every verse was written by the person it's associated with, can we?
No, that's a crucial distinction. The texts were compiled and edited much later. While a lot of the material feels like this direct, authentic, personal expression,
Right.
a monk or a nun just spontaneously reflecting on their journey.
Right.
We know the collections include different kinds of content. Some verses are dialogues, some are teachings that were addressed to that person. And critically, some verses were added by redactors hundreds of years later to kind of flesh out a story or a doctrine.
So that makes interpretation really complex. You have to gauge the internal voice.
You do.
And one of the strongest examples of that pure, personal voice has to be Talapua. His verses are just so raw. It's almost dramatic, this intense internal conflict.
Oh, absolutely. He's wrestling his own stubborn mind right there on the page. Talapua sounds like a man struggling in real time with the biggest questions of existence.
And then you have someone like Vaigisa.
Aogisa is different. His verses are noted for their high degree of poetic sophistication. It's almost a display of virtuosity, using complex meters and imagery.
So it's not just about the doctrine, but also the beauty of the language.
Exactly. It shows the compiler was gathering texts for their literary merit, too.
This range of material brings us to a really crucial point about Pali literature, this dividing line that sets the Therigatha and Therakya apart from the later works. Why are they so distinct?
Because they are laser focused on one thing: seclusion, rigorous meditation, mindfulness, and above all, liberation achieved in this life.
In this life.
Yes. The atmosphere is one of spiritual emergency. There's no time to waste. The goal is mastery right now.
And this is where the contrast with later texts, like the Abhidanas, becomes so stark. I mean, those came maybe 3 or 4 centuries after the Buddha.
And they represent a real shift in the whole, spiritual economy. The Abhidanas moved away from that urgency of present moment liberation. The focus shifted entirely to glorifying the Buddha.
Making him almost a cosmic figure.
And perhaps more consequentially for the average person, encouraging merit-making.
And by merit-making, we mean performing pious acts, donating food, building monuments, offering flowers, not to get liberated now, but to get a good rebirth.
Exactly. You're accumulating spiritual capital for a better future, maybe attaining heaven or enlightenment in a future life. The goal shifts from personal spiritual mastery today to deferred spiritual gratification tomorrow.
It completely changes the tone of the religion, from an intensive path for the few to a broad ethical system for the many.
And we see this difference in a really shocking detail in the research.
Right, let's talk about Kansamana. This one verse just pops up in the Theragatha and sounds completely out of place.
It is so jarring. Kantasamana claims that after offering a single lotus flower, he rejoiced in heaven for 800 million years.
800 million years.
And then he finally attained Nibbana with whatever was left over from his merit. It feels utterly alien. The research calls that sentiment so out of place and belonging to a different world of thought, a different religion even.
Oh, it really underscores that doctrinal shift.
It does, and this also brings up the role of the commentary we rely on. Dhammapala wrote his commentary about 1,000 years after these verses were composed.
1,000 years.
Right, and while it's invaluable for linguistic and doctrinal analysis, here's the problem. When he gives the backstories for these monks and nuns, he often pulls them from those later, non-historical texts, like the Apadanas.
So if you want the genuine historical or emotional truth of that first generation, you have to listen past the later stories. The verses themselves are the purest source.
You have to rely on the poetry. The commentary helps us understand the tradition, but it rarely gives you genuine historical context for the original authors.
Okay, let's use that purity of voice as our lens as we move into the monk's experience.
When we turn specifically to the Theragatha, the classic voice you hear is unmistakable. It is a song of liberation, rejoicing in a simple life lived with nature.
And the most powerful theme is this intense focus on renunciation and seclusion. They are actively choosing the wilderness.
They seek out solitude not as an endurance test, but as the only real path to inner comfort and mastery.
And you see this recurring idea of contrast between an external threat and their internal security.
Beautifully illustrated when the monks reflect on the weather. Sukuti and Godika both invoke the powerful, often terrifying god of thunder and rain. They describe the threat of a monsoon storm.
Sukuti says, "My hut is roofed and pleasant, sheltered from the wind. So rain, heavens, as you please. My mind is serene and freed. I practice wholeheartedly. So rain, heavens."
The contrast is so powerful. The storm can rage, the physical world can be chaotic, but the monk is safe. His mind, through deep practice, through jhana, is roofed, secure, serene. It's an incredible metaphor for mental security.
So the natural world isn't just something to endure. It's the crucible for their practice. It's like a spiritual gymnasium.
We see this vividly in Sitaka's verse. He describes the environment of Karavu. Crested peacocks with beautiful blue necks cry out. Aroused by a cool breeze, they awaken the sleeper to practice jhana.
Wait, that's fascinating. The peacock's cry, which I would find incredibly distracting, is framed as a spiritual alarm clock.
It is. It's a reminder of the urgency of their task. The cool breeze doesn't lull him to sleep. It sharpens his focus for absorption.
And Vanavacha describes the sheer physical delight he finds in nature.
Yes, countering the idea that this life is all joyless suffering. He says, glistening, they look like blue storm clouds with waters cool and streams so clear. These rocky crags delight me.
That sounds like a travel brochure for spiritual wanderers.
Hmm.
It suggests that renunciation leads not to absence, but to a recalibration of pleasure.
But this path is not easy. It demands immense discipline, which is why so many verses are these harsh self-admonitions, warnings against spiritual stagnation. The urgency is relentless.
And the most memorable warning, the one aimed at sloth and complacency, uses an analogy that is impossible to forget.
Oh, Dasika's verse, it's visceral. The dullard who gets drowsy from overeating is described as rolling round the bed like a great hog stuffed with grain.
The implication is brutal. That hog, comfortable and satisfied, returns to the womb again and again.
You return to the cycle of suffering, says Sarah, because you chose the comfort of a full belly and a long nap. It connects physical comfort directly to spiritual failure.
And this urgency means immediate, drastic action. Monks like Tissa and Vatamana are told to give up desire, acting like they're struck by a sword, like their head was on fire.
You don't respond to a sword tomorrow, you respond right now. It's an image of spiritual life as a constant, extreme emergency.
And a lot of this effort was focused on the battle against sensual attachment, often triggered by running into their past.
These dramatic confrontations. Nagasamala and Kandana both encounter their former wives, often unexpectedly, adorned with jewelry.
Right, trying to pull them back into domestic life. But the realization they share is instant. The woman is seen not as a beloved, but as a snare of death laid down.
That phrase, a snare of death, it's not about her, is it? It's about the mental attachment she represents. That confrontation is what triggers their final freedom. They aren't just fighting temptation, they are transcending it.
And ultimately, the biggest task, the one that defines the whole journey, is taming the mind itself.
A recurring metaphor across the entire Therigatha. The mind is depicted as inherently wild. Hatharaputa recalls his mind wandering how it wished, where it liked, as it pleased.
And the analogy for the effort required is so specific.
The trainer guiding a wild, rutting elephant with a hook.
Why an elephant? What's so special about that image?
Because an elephant is tremendously strong, hard to control, and when it's in musth or rutting, it's driven by this powerful, almost uncontrollable instinct.
So taming it requires skill, patience, and some force.
Exactly. Viyatasena vows to cage his mind like an elephant in a stockade and tame it. It's a metaphor for disciplined, intentional action against your own internal nature.
And this brings us back to Talaputa. He resolves to fasten his mind to a meditation subject, like an elephant tied to a post. But his verses carry this radical insight about the mind's agency that goes way beyond just discipline.
Yes, this is where the text suddenly becomes a commentary on the whole social structure of ancient India. Talaputa realizes that the mind alone is the ultimate creator of fate, status, and suffering.
He says the mind alone makes a Brahmin, an aristocrat, or a royal seer.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that a complete dismantling of the Brahminical caste system?
It is absolutely radical. In a society where birth determined everything, Talaputa is saying that all of that is secondary, maybe even illusory. If your mind is untrained, you are spiritually poor, no matter your caste. If you tame your mind, you are spiritually noble, no matter your birth.
And he doesn't stop there. He says the mind causes rebirth in hell, as animals or as gods.
So the mind is not just a personal problem. It is the engine of the entire cycle of suffering, Sasar.
This knowledge that the mind creates everything means that taming that mind is the single core duty. It puts absolute agency and absolute responsibility right on the individual.
Now, moving to the Therigatha provides a fascinating and necessary shift. While the monks often focused on the wild external world, these compositions are frequently more dramatic and have this acutely personal flavor. They're often dealing with the struggles of the domestic sphere.
And that intimacy starts immediately. The very first verse from an unnamed nun is this tender moment of encouragement between two women.
Sleep softly, little nun, wrapped in the cloth you sewed yourself, for your desire has been quelled, like vegetables boiled dry in a pot.
It's instantly personal. The use of the diminutive therakah, little nun, shows such warmth and familiarity. And the metaphor.
Vegetables boiled dry in a pot. It's a kitchen metaphor. It speaks directly to a shared domestic female experience of endless work. Her desire is quelled, not with some abstract philosophy, but with the quiet finality of a cooking pot.
This theme of personal freedom and agency is a huge hallmark of the Therigatha. These women are active agents of their own spiritual world.
We see this brilliantly with Muta's verse. She adapted a monk's verse to celebrate her release from what she calls 3 crooked things.
Right, while the monk listed his farming tool sickles, Plows Muta explicitly names her husband, alongside the mortar and pestle.
I mean, she is equating the tools of domestic labor with her marriage itself as objects of confinement.
It's incredible.
Absolutely. And commentators have long pointed out the sexual innuendo of the mortar and pestle in Indian literature. It's a double entendre for kitchen drudgery and sexual servitude. Muta is celebrating a complete renunciation.
The path for the nuns also included these profound reflections on impermanence, particularly with the aging body. And the most famous example is, of course, Ambapali.
Ambapali was a renowned courtesan. Her entire wealth and status were based on her stunning beauty. She met the Buddha late in life, and her verses are this confrontation with the decay of that very source of her power.
She uses incredibly specific, painful metaphors. Her nose, once perfect, is now shriveled like a pepper. Her teeth, once bright as a jasmine flower, now broken and yellow.
And here is the profound spiritual pivot. She used the highly sophisticated poetic art she learned as a courtesan arts originally intended to entice and glorify, to compose a meditation on the body's decay.
So isn't she still attached to the story of her beauty, even in its decay? I mean, doesn't Buddhism teach non-attachment?
That's the critical subtlety. While the monks often resorted to the pill of repulsion, meditating on disgusting aspects of the body to cure desire, Ambapali elevates the details. She shows acceptance, even dignity.
She transforms it into what the Source calls a new kind of beauty.
Exactly. Her body becomes the witness to the truth of impermanence. It's a shift from repulsion to realism. She's not attached to the perfection of her form anymore, but she's using the history of her form to achieve insight.
That's a much richer psychological journey. We also see many nuns grappling with intense personal suffering and grief.
Often as a precursor to their insight. Ubiri, for instance, was completely distraught over the death of her daughter until a sage helped her realize the universal nature of loss.
But the most dramatic story has to be Isidasi's tale. It's this long, sprawling account of just an impossible life of woes.
It's a tale of relentless bad luck, multiple failed marriages despite her being a perfect wife. Her father even tries to marry her off to a homeless ascetic who still can't stand her.
So she finally realizes her suffering must have a karmic root.
Yes, and her story details the chain of woeful rebirths that followed one bad deed in a past life. Adultery.
And the rebirths are shocking.
They're meant to be. A castrated monkey, a lame she-goat, a blind red calf, a genderless street slave. This intense, vivid recounting of suffering serves as the backdrop to the glorious freedom she finally achieves. It highlights the weight of what she shed.
And finally, the Therigatha is noted for the sheer fearlessness of the nuns when confronting sexism and temptation.
Mara, the evil tempter, is frequently defeated. He's the fall guy. He tries to gaslight nuns like Soma, saying that as a woman, she's too weak for enlightenment.
And she immediately refutes him.
Yes, showing that spiritual attainment has nothing to do with gender. But the confrontation with the male gaze is taken to an astonishing extreme with the nun Suba. A rogue blocks her path, praising her beauty, focusing specifically on her eyes.
Her response is just. It's pure literary theater.
It's a radical act of renunciation. She tears out one of her beautiful eyes and gives it to him, saying, "Come now, take this eye."
He immediately loses his lust and asks for forgiveness, and her eye is restored later. It's such a powerful demonstration. The object of desire is destroyed, and with it, the desire itself.
She's not a passive victim. She is an active, dramatic, spiritual warrior.
And even intellectual challenges are met with incredible wit. Puthka, a water carrier, challenged a proud Brahmin who believed that ritual bathing purified you from wickedness.
I love this story. A water carrier, at the absolute bottom of the social hierarchy, just takes down centuries of ritual purity with a single, devastating argument.
Her logic is flawless. She argues that if bathing worked, all the frogs and the turtles, cobras, crocodiles would go to heaven.
As would the professional sinners, butchers, fishermen, and bandits. It cuts straight to the core of his belief, proving that ethical conduct is internal, not external.
It just confirms that the Therigatha is a collection celebrating not just spiritual achievement, but also agency, wit, and profound intellectual sharpness.
We've spent a lot of time on the human stories, which is crucial, but now we need to shift gears to the bedrock of the practice itself. And this means diving into the translator's dilemma.
Right, the massive challenge of taking these deep Pali concepts and bringing them into English without losing their meaning.
This is critical because many of the most famous Buddhist terms have been rendered in ways that fundamentally mislead modern practitioners. We have to start with samadhi.
Which is usually translated as concentration.
And the translator we're drawing on strongly rejects that. He calls it the single most damaging translation in Buddhism.
Wow, why so damaging? Concentration sounds so disciplined.
Because it misleads people into thinking they have to force themselves to focus intensely on a single point, which often leads to tension and frustration.
So what do the texts, the suttas, define samadhi as?
They define it as the 4 jhanas, or absorptions. This is a state described as vast, immeasurable, and transcending the sensory realm. When you read the definition of jhana, it's a state of immense joy, ease, and stillness, not tension.
So if you're trying to force concentration, you're missing the point entirely. What's the better term?
The term chosen here is immersion. Think about when you're truly immersed in a book or music. Your attention is drawn in effortlessly. You are absorbed, engrossed, without having to force it.
That makes perfect sense. Immersion is a state of flow, not a state of tension.
Precisely. And the Pali word samadhi actually carries these dual roots. One root means coalescence, a gathering together, like a tortoise pulling its limbs into its shell.
Everything coming into one unified calm spot. And the other root.
It refers to illumination, like kindling a fire. So samadhi is both calming everything down and simultaneously igniting an inner light.
Calm, focused intensity, but without effort.
Right. And that brings us to the second key term, jhana. This is so often just translated as meditation.
Which is also wrong, or at least not the full picture.
Exactly. True meditation, the foundational practice, is satipatthana mindfulness. Jhana is the exalted state that results from that practice. It's the deep meditative absorption.
And like samadhi, jhana has those dual roots.
It does. It means mental steadiness, like a donkey gazing at food, but just as importantly, it refers to lamps burning or illumination.
And that linkage to light sounds really important.
It connects jhana back to the ancient Brahmanical concept of di, the divine inspiration of the rising sun. So when a meditator enters jhana, they aren't just calm, they are experiencing illumination, a state of clarity and radiance.
So both samadhi and jhana convey these parallel senses of coalescence and illumination.
Exactly. And the chosen translation for jhana remains absorption, which captures that idea of being utterly consumed by the experience.
This precision helps us understand another concept, body neutrality. The Buddhist texts take a fascinatingly pragmatic approach to the human body.
That's right. It's neither modern body positivity nor just a blanket idea that the body is evil. It's pragmatic realism. The texts contain both positive and negative depictions of the body, accepting they are both beautiful and disgusting.
So the goal isn't to fixate on one extreme, but to counter whatever imbalances in your mind to reach a healthy and reasonable equanimity.
It's remedial. If you're entranced by beauty and lust, you need the strong remedy, the pill of repulsion, to shock the mind out of its delusion. But if you're struggling with self-loathing, you're directed toward breath or loving kindness to build calm and acceptance.
The ultimate purpose, then, is to challenge our attachment to our physical form, whether it's positive or negative. It's about freedom from the tyranny of the physical.
It's about moving beyond that binary. When the mind is free of clinging, the body just is. It is neither good nor bad. It's just a vehicle. That equanimity is the essence of body neutrality in this context.
It's sobering, after all these peak moments of triumph and insight, to then encounter a section of the verses that looks forward with, well, immense pessimism.
The prophecies of decline, found in the verses of monks like Parasariya and Fusa, they're powerful. They serve as a double warning.
Criticizing the decline already happening and projecting those failings into the future.
Exactly. Warning practitioners against the perennial temptations of worldliness creeping back into the spiritual life.
And what's the very first sign of decline they flag? It seems to be a loss of that rigorous simplicity.
Fusa predicts that monks will become lazy, weary of the forest, and prefer to stay in the villages. Upasina warns that the mind that is greedy for flavors, prioritizing good food, won't enjoy the deep stillness of jhana.
So the spiritual path dissolves when people choose the path of least resistance, convenience, and consumption over discipline.
Precisely. They give up the wild inspiration of the rocky crags for the ease and comfort of the lay community.
And this comfort-seeking rapidly escalates into outright corruption and wrong livelihood.
Parasarya details this, and the language is cutting. He says mendicants will act like doctors in medicine, householders in business, and even this must have stung prostitutes in makeup.
The prostitute in makeup analogy, that implies a performative quality, doesn't it? A fake spiritual facade to attract support.
Absolutely. The concern is that monks would provide pseudo-spiritual services or material goods, but only expecting more in return. The spiritual exchange becomes transactional, mercenary.
So they'd assemble the community not for the Dhamma, but for business and fundraising.
It is the ultimate reversal. Instead of letting go of wealth, they become masters of generating it under the guise of spirituality. It's a powerful warning against spiritual commerce.
The prophecies even get into the aesthetics of their clothing, this color war within the Sangha.
Fusa predicts that future monks will come to loathe the deep-dyed ochre robe, the traditional garment of the free. Instead, they will become besotted by white clothes, wearing the white banner of those of other religions.
So changing the robe color isn't a style choice. It's an external symbol of a complete internal betrayal.
Exactly. Ochre represents freedom, simplicity, being purified. The white robe symbolizes worldliness, householders, and other religious traditions. A restless fool is worthy of the white robe. It's a visual manifestation of an inward spiritual rot.
But the sources don't just leave us with total fatalism. The decline narrative is powerfully countered by the enduring possibility of the path.
That enduring possibility is the imperative from Ravada of the acacia wood, who gives this masterful image of diligence. He says, "I don't long for death. I don't long for life. I await my time, like a worker waiting for their wages."
That's profound. He's not clinging to life or wishing for death. He is simply performing his duty, practicing in the present moment, waiting for the natural conclusion.
It is the ultimate dedication to the present. And Parsaria confirms this hope, reminding the listener that the path to freedom is still possible, even in the latter days. The principles endure, even if the practitioners stray.
Which means these texts are just as relevant today as they were 2,500 years ago. The path is always available. This deep dive into the Theragatha and Theragatha has offered us this intimate, intense, and surprisingly dramatic shortcut to understanding the spiritual commitment of really Buddhism.
It really has. We've seen these profound personal struggles. The monk wrestling his mind like a rutting elephant, the nun triumphing over aggression with that shocking act of renunciation.
And the discovery of inner sanctuary amid external storms.
We've seen that the spiritual journey transcends gender. Though the experiences were filtered through deeply gendered realities, domestic life for the women, wilderness for the men, allowing both to celebrate their hard-won agency.
And the complexity of the core concepts. Understanding that samadhi should be immersion, reflecting coalescence and illumination, not strained concentration. That just underscores that these texts are recording highly refined, altered states of consciousness.
And we end where we began, with that profound realization that the mind is the ultimate agent of creation, suffering, and freedom. We have to return to Tallaputa's realization.
He understood that it's the mind that determines everything. Only you, mind, make a Brahmin, make an aristocrat or a royal seer. Sometimes we become peasants or menials, and life as a god is also on account of you.
If the mind creates kings and peasants, heavens and hells, if it is the ultimate master of existence, then this knowledge is the true hidden treasure found by the learner in these ancient verses.
And the final provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. If your status, your suffering, and your eventual liberation are all accounted for by your own mind, then the single most important duty for any human, regardless of your time or place, isn't external endeavor, not accumulating wealth or status, but the internal mastery and taming of that wild, magnificent, and terrifying mind.